Hey everybody. So today we're going to be going over dynamically created collisions from an actor. So how this is going to work is we have a custom collision actor, and as you can see, there's actually no components here besides the default scene root. Um, so we're going to go over how to set up and create basically as many collisions as you want off of the default actor using add components and get them to work together dynamically to do certain events or whatever you want them to do. So, for instance, I'm going to stick with the data layer examples I've done before. So basically, as I walk into the collision, it creates well, it loads in the data layer. And as I move from one collision to the other, the data layer stays open. So these are three different collisions. Ah, jeez. You've got the collision back here, the collision in this area, and then the collision that's just outside the door. And there's no like loading in and out. As long as I'm in one of the collisions, it will keep the data layer loaded, and as soon as I leave the collision, it will unload. Specifically, the design for this would be in case you have a weird room, for instance, like this one, where you want the stuff inside the room to be loaded when you're in it, but not when you're outside of it or in the room right next door. Because normally, if you were like right here and you just had a straight box, you would have to load both at the same time. Uh, but with this method, you could only load exactly what you need to. It's a little circumstantial. There are a lot of use cases where you're going to have weird hallways or rooms that are right next to other rooms, and you're not going to want to have everything loaded all at once. Um, it also works really well for events or even like certain damage instances if you want certain areas to have damage markers for the player and you don't want to have to set up like four different actor collisions or set up a new actor just for like a specific area. Like having to set up a new actor with this specific setup, well, these specific collisions, you're only going to be able to use this space like, maybe a handful of times. So that actor, you would just end up making multiples of it and having to adjust it on like adjust each new actor. And this way just makes it much easier in the long run. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so to start with, I took this room right here. We're just going to go ahead and you can block out whatever room you want. I did this, it takes like 30 seconds if you just use the block out tools available in Unreal. I have some other videos about that if you need an explanation on how that works. Um, Next, to copy the example, we're going to create a new layer just for this room. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the hidden objects layer 5, or I'll just create it from scratch real quick so you can see, just if you need a reminder how it's done. So we'll go to miscellaneous, data layer, I'll call it hidden objects layer 6. Open it up here. Oh, jeez. Data layer type, we want it to be runtime, and then we can leave the rest of this as normal. Close that. We'll take this, we'll drag it in here to my hidden objects layer. If you don't have this window for data layers, you can find it up here. It should be under world partition, data layers outline. Of course, you can test if this works using other events as well. I'm just using data layers because I already have all that stuff set up from previous tutorials. Next, we're going to need to go ahead and create another one of these actors. So I'm just going to go into here, collision actor. I'm just going to make a new actor. Call it some collision. Custom collision tutorial. So I'll go ahead and open that up. I'll move that here as well. Okay. So as before, we don't need to add any components actively. We're going to be creating them dynamically. So let's go ahead and to start with, let's go ahead and get the events set up for the collisions later. We're going to do 2 custom events. I'm going to name mine run positive overlaps and run negative overlaps. So we'll go ahead and move these here. I like them to be kind of close together, but not too close. For later, we're going to need 1 integer variable. So we'll just create a new variable. Probably name this currently overlapped collisions. Or you can shorten that to something else. But this is going to track the basically if the player is currently overlapping a collision or not without having to get any sort of actor reference or anything like that. It's a little cheaper this way, as long as everything is set up right. For positive, we'll do an add. I don't like to use the increment on these. There's weird bugs sometimes when using straight like increment additions. So we'll do this and then set. So every time this event is triggered, we're just going to add 1 to the currently overlapped, and then we'll do the same thing in reverse. So we'll subtract whenever we run this event. Okay. Line that up. Okay. So that's all good. Next, for testing purposes, let's go ahead and do a print string here. Yeah. I like to do print strings just to make sure the numbers are adding and subtracting properly. When we go to later, just in case there's any issues, it'll help with debugging and verifying that it's all working. Closer. Let's go ahead and do a branch next on the upper level. We're going to take the currently overlapped here. We're going to make sure that it is greater than 0. Plug that in there. And then basically the same thing. So I'll just copy and paste that down here. This time though, we're going to be checking to make sure it's equal to 0. It should never go below 0. So if it does, then that means there's some sort of issue in our setup, as it should only add on when we overlap, which will bring it to positive, and then it should only reduce when we leave, and it should never get below 0. So next we'll do a do once node. For this top layer, we're going to be using the data layer subsystem. What it's called? I'll just put in subsystem. Get data layer subsystem. There it is. And then set data layer runtime state. And then we're going to want to pull off here and create the variable for that. And I'm going to make it instance editable. Since we want to use this collision in a lot of different locations, we want it to be changeable from the actor itself and not a set data layer. So we'll go ahead and just move these down here. Copy and paste this. Load activated and unloaded. And then this do once only needs to occur on the top because basically the overlap collisions, it could go up to like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And every time it's above 0, it's going to hit this true. So we don't want it to try and like go through and reload everything multiple times. Since it's already loaded, it shouldn't have a huge effect on like performance, but there's really no reason for it to pass this node more than one time. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to pull off, we're going to do a sequence, and the 0 is going to unload it, and the 1 is going to reset this. So if it ever does hit 0, it'll reset the do once node so that you can reactivate the data layer. Okay. So all of that looks good, except this is slightly back too far. Okay. And these are a little too close. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and compile and save that. And next, we're gonna need to actually set up the collisions here. So we're gonna need to go to the construction script since we want to be able to edit the size of the boxes and see what they're doing in real time. So we're gonna need to make 2 more variables. Actually, I'm gonna delete the second one real quick because it's easier to do it all at once. So I'll name this one the box collision. Oh geez, messing that up. Box collisions. We'll change this to a vector. We'll make it an array, and then we're going to make it instance editable. Once we have this, we'll just duplicate it, and we're going to name it box sizes. Actually, let's rename this first one to box locations. So we've got the box locations and the box sizes. Now we're going to pull out box locations. Going to do a for loop. Yeah. And then let's do add box collision. So, okay, so at this point, this is where things can vary a little bit. So add box collision, you can add multiple different types of collisions. Let me add an add here. So we've got to work with for adding components. We have the box, capsule, and sphere. These all have slightly different requirements for the box sizes. I'm doing the example with boxes, so I'm using a vector to change the shape of the box. But if you do like a capsule, then I usually like to change them at a base level. So the next step after this, we would do set box extent, which lets you change down to like very fine details the box's shape. But with capsules, it's not the same node. So I would follow along, use box collisions. You can use it with other types of collisions, and you can even change the actual scale itself if you would rather do that. I'm going to leave everything set to default. We're going to plug this into location. We're going to leave rotation and transform as default. But if you want to use scale instead of box extent, then you can plug box sizes into the transform scale instead of box extent. So what we're going to do now is take this array index. We'll do a get node. Jeez. Let's do... We can just do a copy. Back a little bit. And then this is going to get plugged into here. Actually, I'm going to reroute this because I want to put that closer. So I'll do reroute, plug in, I'll move this up. Okay. So now every time we have a box location, so if the array is zeroed out or there's nothing in it, then it will run through this and it'll just stop. It won't do anything. But if there's anything in this array, then it will loop through, add a box collision at the location specified, and then on that same loop, it will get the index for the box size that lines up, put it into box extent, and create it. So as a default, we can go ahead and actually pull this out and test it. So custom collision here. Let's go ahead and just put it right there so you guys can see. Now we've got the box locations, box sizes. So you want these to line up. So 1 and 1 are going to be for the same box. So to start with, let's change the box size and make it 250 by 250 by 250. So there we go, there's our box. Now it's kind of into the ground. So let's go ahead and just drag this up a bit. And then we can go ahead and place it. So let's place it at our front door. So we'll do negative. And then negative. All right. So there we go. So now that box is in front of our door. Let's lower it just a bit. And then let's actually make it a little bit longer. Let's do like 400 and bring it a bit more out. Make it a bit wider. So we'll do 400 again. And it's actually above the ceiling a little bit here, assuming that this is our ceiling. So we can actually lower that down a bit as well. So let's just do it right into the ground. Okay. So that should come into contact with any person who gets near that area. And then for a second one, you just do one more. So we got 0, 0. If you want to take the same box size, you can just copy and paste it into the second one. So now we've got 2 boxes. Let's go ahead and raise this up. Do right there. Go ahead and let's pretty close to centered, but let's go ahead and make it a little bit bigger here. So we'll do 450. And then we will move it. We'll move it more towards the. There we go. Okay. I'll make it longer. So we'll do probably about there. And then we will try to move it along the Y. Okay. All right, so that's good. You see there's a little bit of a gap there. It's not too big of a deal. We can try to move it slightly more along the X though. I believe that's negative. There we go. So now they're basically touching. And then for our last box, let's go ahead and that. We will take, let's do our first box size. I'll just copy it. Actually, I want to change that back to 450 since I accidentally edited a second ago. Go ahead and paste it. And then for index this one, let's go ahead and that's a positive on the X, I believe. If you notice it's skipping around, it's because there's actually, every time you change a number even slightly, it redoes the loop, which it does on one frame. So if you have a lot of collisions, it can be a little expensive during the actual editor use. However, there are ways to get around this, and I will try to show you some of those in a minute. So let's go ahead and raise this box a bit. There we go. All right, so now we got our same basic setup as before. Pretty close. All right. We're going to reopen our custom collision. And in the construction script, we're going to continue on here. Now that we have these, I'm going to need to reroute. Actually, let's go ahead and I'll add in the thing to help with performance right now. So a really easy way to keep this from slowing you down is to create a variable that is a Boolean. Set a branch right at the beginning of the construction script. Plug it in here. We'll do active, compile. We'll set the default to yes, actually, and instance editable. And then in here, if you turn off active, it will temporarily disable the construction script. So if you know you need to make something a lot larger, you can now change these numbers without it affecting your performance at all, like I am. And then you can just turn it back on to see what the result is. If I remember correctly, this was 400. No, 450. So another way, of course, is you can always just type directly in here if you want to increase it by a lot. If you just type in 800, then it only does it one time instead of on every frame, and it won't slow down your computer. Now, if you have like hundreds of collisions, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Like I wouldn't recommend having hundreds of collisions, but if you did, then it will still loop through every collision and every box size to verify. So it could still slow down a little bit for like one frame, but it's only editor side. It's not actually a changing during the game itself. So that's purely an editor performance issue. It's not a game performance issue. Okay. So we got that. We'll just leave that as positive for now. And then let's go ahead and off of this, we're going to do a bind event. So let's see. Bind event to on. Yeah, there we go. Looking for this one. Bind event to on component begin overlap, or you can do to on actor begin overlap. I typically do component, although actor should work. Do this. We'll plug this into here, and then we're going to pull off and create an event. And then we're going to do the same thing over here. Reroute. Except this time it'll be bind event to on component and overlap. And then here. Connect. Okay. Line those up. So now if you compile, you're going to get these two errors. This is because we don't have these events actually connected anywhere. So what we're going to have to do is create, typically I just create functions that work as a in-between to get to the actual event. So we can just go ahead and do create a matching function in here. This is going to be our on begin overlap. So let's go ahead. We're just going to check to make sure that this is a player character. You can do this for anything. You could check for various other things. You could check for interfaces instead. I'm just going to check for the player character because it's a very quick way to set it up if the player is what you're actually trying to check for. And then directly from the function, we're going to run the positive overlaps. So overlap is player character, true, run positive overlaps, return. And that one's done. We'll compile, save. We can go ahead and close that. We'll go back to the construction script. Error's gone. From here, we'll go ahead and do create matching function again. And then we're going to set it up exactly the same. Almost exactly the same. Oh, Jesus. I just smashed my keyboard there. So, get player character. Branch. If it's true, this time we're going to run negative overlaps. Where's our return node is missing. Return node. You don't always have to use a return node, I just like to. It's a good habit to get into. Okay, so we've got that. So these should now trigger the events we set up at the very beginning. And it should be able to activate and deactivate the data layer. Now, the last thing, we actually have to set up something to go in this data layer, because currently it is empty. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy these boxes here. Okay. I'll do this. And then I'm going to remove them from their other data layer, and I'm going to add them into Hidden Objects Layer 6. Okay, so at this point, this should work. Let's go ahead and test it out. Okay, so as you can see, it did not. We are getting the correct numbers, though. Oh, I know what we forgot. Or what I forgot. Should I grab this actor? So in this actor, there was the in data layer. I forgot to change it to Hidden Objects Layer 6. Okay. Save. Play from here. Okay. There we go. So as you can see, as we move through the collisions, the numbers in the top left are being printed out for us. It's showing just the current number. Anything higher than 2 means you're overlapping multiple collisions. Anything typically at 2 means you're overlapping a single collision. And if it goes to 0, then you're overlapping nothing. Oh, so right about here. So, yep, so that works. So that is a kind of a dynamic way to set up collisions for rooms with odd shapes. You can use other types of collisions besides just box collisions. This is especially good for hallways where like you've got multiple hallways next to each other that don't actually connect. And you don't need those things loaded in each hallway. Or you can use it for specific events, like you can do damage over time events or something through these collisions as well if it's like specific areas. All right, so looks good. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to post them. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys have a good day.